Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other kids at Lincoln High School. While her classmates talked about their parents' jobs as teachers, accountants, or shop owners, Sarah kept quiet about what her mother really did for work. When pressed, she would simply say her mom worked for the government. Which wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The truth was that Commander Lisa Martinez was one of the few female Navy SEALs in the United States military. She had earned her trident the hard way, surviving Hell Week and months of grueling training that broke most men twice her size. But Sarah had learned early in life that people didn't believe a woman could be a SEAL, so she kept her mother's true profession to herself. Everything changed on a cold Tuesday morning in November. Sarah was sitting in the cafeteria with her lunch tray, picking at her sandwich, while listening to Brad Thompson and his group of friends bragging about their father's military service. Brad's dad had been in the Army, and he never let anyone forget it. "My dad served 2 tours in Afghanistan," Brad announced loudly, making sure everyone within earshot could hear him. "He's a real war hero, not like these fake soldiers you see on TV." Sarah tried to ignore him, but Brad wasn't finished. He turned his attention to the quiet girl sitting alone at the nearby table. "What about you, Martinez? What does your daddy do?" "Wait, let me guess. He probably works at the grocery store or something, right?" Brad's friends laughed, encouraging him to continue his cruel game. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. She had dealt with Brad's bullying before, but today felt different. Maybe it was because her mother had just returned from a classified mission overseas, and Sarah was proud of what her mom had accomplished, even if she couldn't talk about the details. "Actually," Sarah said quietly, "my dad isn't in the military, but my mom is." Brad's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Your mom? What is she, a nurse or something? Maybe she serves coffee to the real soldiers?" The laughter from Brad's table grew louder, and Sarah could feel other students starting to pay attention to the conversation. Her hands clenched into fists under the table. "She's a Navy SEAL," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by stunned silence. Then Brad burst out laughing even harder than before. "A Navy SEAL? Are you serious right now?" Brad slapped the table, tears forming in his eyes from laughing so hard. "There are no women Navy SEALs, you idiot. Everyone knows that." "Actually, there are now," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "The ban was lifted, and qualified women can—" "Qualified women?" Brad interrupted, standing up from his chair. "Listen, Martinez, I don't know what fantasy land you're living in, but women can't be SEALs. They're not strong enough, they're not tough enough, and they sure as hell can't handle what real warriors go through. Your mom might wear a uniform, but she's not a SEAL." The entire cafeteria had gone quiet now. Students at nearby tables had stopped eating to watch the confrontation unfold. Sarah could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting to see how she would respond to Brad's challenge. "She is a SEAL," Sarah insisted, standing up to face Brad directly. "She went through Bud/S training, she earned her trident, and she served on multiple combat missions. Just because you can't believe a woman could do something your dad never could doesn't make it less true." Brad's face turned red with anger. "My dad never could? My dad is 10 times the soldier your mom could ever dream of being, and I'm calling your bluff right now, Martinez. If your mom is really a Navy SEAL, then prove it." "How am I supposed to prove it?" Sarah shot back. "It's not like she walks around school in her uniform." "Exactly." Brad pointed at her triumphantly. "Because she's not really a SEAL. You're making it up to try to sound cool, but everybody here knows you're lying. Women can't be SEALs, period. End of story." Sarah felt tears of frustration building in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of Brad and his friends. She had grown up hearing stories about her mother's training, about the impossible challenges she had overcome, about the respect she had earned from her male teammates. But sitting here in this cafeteria, facing Brad's cruel laughter and the skeptical faces of her classmates, Sarah realized that the truth didn't matter if no one was willing to believe it. "Fine," Sarah said quietly. "Don't believe me. I don't care what you think." She grabbed her backpack and started to walk away, but Brad wasn't finished with her yet. "Hey, Martinez," he called after her. "Next time you want to lie about your family, maybe pick something more believable, Like maybe your mom is a superhero or something. That would be just as realistic as her being a Navy SEAL. The cafeteria erupted in laughter again, and Sarah felt her face burning with shame. She pushed through the crowd of students and out the cafeteria doors, trying to escape the humiliation that seemed to follow her wherever she went. For the rest of the day, Sarah couldn't concentrate on her classes. Word had spread quickly through the school about her confrontation with Brad, and she could hear students whispering about her as she walked through the hallways. Some seemed curious about whether she was telling the truth, but most seemed to agree with Brad that she had been making up stories about her mother. During her last period chemistry class, Sarah's teacher, Mr. Henderson, pulled her aside after the lesson. "Sarah, I couldn't help but hear about what happened at lunch today," he said gently. "I want you to know that if you're having problems with other students, you can always come talk to me or another teacher." Sarah appreciated his concern, but she could see the doubt in his eyes too. Even Mr. Henderson, who had always been kind to her, didn't really believe that her mother could be a Navy SEAL. "It's fine, Mr. Henderson," Sarah said. "I can handle it." But as she walked home from school that afternoon, Sarah wasn't sure she could handle it. The whispers, the stares, the constant feeling that everyone thought she was a liar, it was becoming too much to bear. She had always been proud of her mother's service, but now she was starting to wonder if it might be easier to just make up a different story about what her mom did for work. When Sarah got home, she found her mother in the kitchen, still wearing her Navy uniform from a meeting she had attended at the local recruiting office. Commander Martinez looked up from the paperwork she was reviewing and smiled at her daughter. "How was school today, sweetheart?" she asked. Sarah hesitated, not sure how to explain what had happened. Her mother had always taught her to stand up for herself and to be proud of who she was, but today felt different. Today she had stood up for her mother's honor and been humiliated in front of the entire school. "It was okay," Sarah said finally, "just the usual stuff." Commander Martinez studied her daughter's face carefully. She had been trained to read people, to notice the small details that others might miss, and she could tell that something was bothering Sarah. "Are you sure everything's all right?" she asked. "You seem upset about something." Sarah wanted to tell her mother everything, about Brad's cruel words, about the laughter of her classmates, about how alone she felt when no one believed her, but she also didn't want to burden her mother with problems from school. Commander Martinez had enough to worry about with her military responsibilities. "I'm fine, Mom," Sarah said. "I just have some homework to do." She started to head upstairs to her room, but her mother's voice stopped her. "Sarah," Commander Martinez said softly, "I know I can't always be there to protect you from everything, but I want you to know that I'm proud of the young woman you're becoming. You have more strength and courage than you realize." Sarah nodded and managed a small smile before heading upstairs. She didn't feel particularly strong or courageous right now, but she appreciated her mother's words. As she sat at her desk trying to focus on her homework, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about what had happened at school. She wondered if tomorrow would be better or if Brad and his friends would find new ways to make her life miserable. What Sarah didn't know was that her confrontation with Brad had been witnessed by more people than just her fellow students. Mrs. Patricia Williams, the school's head secretary, had been walking through the cafeteria during lunch and had heard every word of the argument. Mrs. Williams had worked at Lincoln High for over 20 years, and she had seen her share of bullying incidents, but something about this particular situation had stuck with her. That evening, Mrs. Williams sat in her living room with her husband, telling him about what she had witnessed at school. "I felt so bad for that poor girl," she said. "The other students were laughing at her, but I could tell she really believed what she was saying about her mother. Either she's an incredible actress or she was telling the truth." "What did you say her last name was?" Mr. Williams asked. "Martinez. Sarah Martinez." Mr. Williams frowned thoughtfully. "Martinez. That name sounds familiar for some reason." He pulled out his phone and started searching online. After a few minutes, his eyes widened in surprise. "Patricia, you need to see this," he said, turning his phone toward his wife. On the screen was a news article about the first female Navy SEAL graduates, and there, in a group photo, was Commander Lisa Martinez. Mrs. Williams gasped as she read the article. Oh my goodness, that poor child was telling the truth. Her mother really is a Navy SEAL. "Not just any Navy SEAL," Mr. Williams said, continuing to read. According to this article, she's been decorated for valor and has served on some highly classified missions. She's the real deal. Mrs. Williams felt sick to her stomach as she thought about how the students had treated Sarah during lunch. Those kids had no idea what they were talking about. They humiliated that girl for no reason. "What are you going to do?" her husband asked. "Mrs. Williams was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she picked up her phone and started dialing. "I'm calling Principal Johnson," she said. "This situation needs to be addressed, and that young lady deserves an apology." Meanwhile, at the Martinez house, Sarah was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She kept replaying the events of the day over and over in her mind, wishing she had handled things differently. Maybe she should have just stayed quiet and ignored Brad's taunts. Maybe she should have lied and said her mother worked in an office somewhere. Down the hall, Commander Martinez was having her own sleepless night. Her motherly instincts told her that something significant had happened to Sarah at school, but she also knew that her daughter was at an age where she needed to learn to handle certain challenges on her own. Still, the urge to protect her child was strong, and she found herself wondering if she should push harder for details about what was troubling Sarah. As both mother and daughter lay awake in their respective rooms, neither of them knew that Mrs. Williams' phone call to Principal Johnson was about to set events in motion that would change everything. The principal had listened carefully to Mrs. Williams' account of the cafeteria incident and had done his own research into Commander Martinez's military record. What he found had impressed him greatly and made him realize that his school had failed one of its students in a significant way. The next morning was going to bring surprises that none of them could have anticipated, and Sarah Martinez was about to learn that sometimes the truth has a way of revealing itself in the most unexpected ways. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a heavy feeling in her chest. She had barely slept, and the thought of facing her classmates again made her stomach churn. She got dressed slowly, hoping that maybe if she took long enough she could somehow avoid going to school altogether. But when she came downstairs for breakfast, her mother was already in the kitchen, dressed in her crisp navy uniform. "You're wearing your uniform to work today?" Sarah asked, noticing that her mother looked more formal than usual. "I have a meeting with some visiting officials," Commander Martinez replied, pouring coffee into her travel mug. "Are you sure you're okay, sweetheart? You look like you didn't sleep well." Sarah forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired." Commander Martinez kissed her daughter's forehead before heading out the door. "Have a good day at school. I'll see you tonight." As Sarah watched her mother drive away, she felt a pang of guilt for not telling her what had really happened yesterday. But what good would it do? Her mother couldn't come to school with her and make the other kids believe the truth. When Sarah arrived at Lincoln High, she could immediately tell that something was different. Students were gathered in small groups, whispering more intensely than usual, and she caught several of them looking in her direction. Her heart sank as she realized that the story of yesterday's confrontation had probably spread even further overnight. She made her way to her locker, trying to ignore the stares and whispers, but as she was gathering her books for first period, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Well, well, if it isn't our little storyteller," Brad Thompson said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He had brought an even larger group of friends with him today, apparently eager for another round of entertainment at Sarah's expense. Sarah closed her locker and turned around, trying to look braver than she felt. "I don't want any trouble, Brad." "I'm not causing trouble," Brad said innocently. "I'm just curious about your mom's super-secret Navy SEAL missions. Did she tell you any cool stories last night? Maybe about how she single-handedly took down a terrorist cell?" The group of students laughed, and Sarah felt her cheeks burning again. She tried to push past them, but Brad stepped into her path. "Come on, Martinez. Don't be shy," he continued. "If your mom is really such a badass warrior, surely she taught you some of her moves, right? Show us some of that SEAL training." "Leave me alone," Sarah said quietly, but her voice was shaking. "Or what?" Brad challenged. "You'll call your mommy to come save you?" "Oh, wait. She's probably off on some top-secret mission, right? Fighting bad guys and saving the world?" The hallway was filling with more students now, drawn by the commotion. Sarah could see phone cameras being pulled out as kids started recording what they expected to be another humiliating moment for the quiet girl who claimed her mother was a Navy SEAL. I said leave me alone, Sarah repeated, but this time her voice was stronger. Something inside her was shifting, a spark of the same determination that had carried her mother through SEAL training. Make me, Brad said, pushing her shoulder slightly. It wasn't hard enough to hurt, but it was enough to show everyone who was in control of this situation. That's when a voice cut through the crowd like a knife. Mr. Thompson, step away from Miss Martinez immediately. Everyone turned to see Principal Johnson walking down the hallway with Mrs. Deckless, Williams beside him. But they weren't alone. Behind them walked a woman in a Navy uniform, her bearing so commanding that the entire hallway seemed to straighten up in response to her presence. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. It was her mother, but she looked different somehow. More official. More dangerous. Commander Martinez's face was stern as she took in the scene before her, her trained eyes immediately assessing the situation and identifying the players involved. The crowd of students parted like the Red Sea as the adults approached. Brad, who had been so confident and aggressive just moments before, suddenly looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Miss Martinez, Principal Johnson said formally, I'd like you to meet your mother, Commander Lisa Martinez of the United States Navy SEALs. The silence that followed was deafening. The students who had been laughing and recording just seconds before now stood frozen, their phones forgotten in their hands. Brad's face had gone completely pale, and his mouth was hanging open in shock. Commander Martinez stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Brad. When she spoke, her voice was calm but carried the unmistakable authority of someone who was used to being obeyed without question. Young man, she said, I believe you were just questioning my daughter about my military service. I'm here to clear up any confusion you might have, Brad stammered, unable to form coherent words. I mean, let me introduce myself properly, Commander Martinez continued, her voice never rising but somehow filling the entire hallway. I am Commander Lisa Martinez, United States Navy SEALs. I graduated from Basic Underwater Demolition / SEAL Training Class 347. I have served on multiple classified missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. I have been awarded the Bronze Star Medal with Combat V, the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Combat V, and the Combat Action Ribbon. She paused, letting her words sink in. Every student in the hallway was completely silent, hanging on her every word. I have completed over 40 combat missions, including several behind enemy lines. I have jumped out of perfectly good aircraft at 30,000 feet, swum through ice-cold water for miles in full combat gear, and spent weeks in hostile territory with nothing but what I could carry on my back. I have done things that most people couldn't imagine, and I have earned the respect of every man I've served alongside. Brad looked like he was going to be sick. Several other students had started backing away, suddenly realizing how wrong they had been about Sarah and her family. But you know what I'm most proud of? Commander Martinez asked, her stern expression softening slightly as she looked at her daughter. I'm most proud of raising a young woman who has the courage to stand up for what's right, even when everyone around her refuses to believe the truth. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes, but for the first time in days, they weren't tears of frustration or embarrassment. They were tears of pride and relief. Principal Johnson stepped forward. Mr. Thompson, you and I need to have a serious conversation in my office. Right now. Brad nodded mutely, still too shocked to speak. As he was led away by the principal, he cast one last look over his shoulder at Commander Martinez, as if he still couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Williams approached Sarah with a warm smile. Honey, I owe you an apology. I heard what happened yesterday, and I should have stepped in sooner. You should never have had to endure that kind of treatment for telling the truth about your mother's service. It's okay. It's okay, Sarah said quietly, though her voice was still shaky from the emotional roller coaster of the past few minutes. No, it's not okay, Commander Martinez said firmly. No child should be bullied for being proud of their family, and no one should ever question the service and sacrifice of our military personnel, regardless of their gender. The crowd of students was still standing around, but their demeanor had completely changed. Instead of mocking laughter, there was a sense of awe and respect in the air. Several students were looking at Sarah with new eyes, realizing that they had completely misjudged her and her family. One student, A girl named Jessica, who had witnessed yesterday's confrontation, stepped forward hesitantly. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I'm really sorry about yesterday. I should have stood up for you. Your mom she's incredible." Sarah nodded, accepting the apology graciously. She could see similar expressions of regret and newfound respect on many of the faces around her. Commander Martinez checked her watch. "I'm afraid I have to get back to my meeting, but Sarah, I want you to know that I'm proud of how you handled yourself. Standing up for the truth isn't always easy, but it's always worth doing." She hugged her daughter tightly, and Sarah could feel the strength and confidence that had carried her mother through all those dangerous missions. For the first time, she realized that some of that same strength lived inside her too. As Commander Martinez started to leave, she paused and turned back to address the gathered students one more time. "I want all of you to remember something," she said. "The military is made up of ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things. We come from all backgrounds, all races, both genders, and we serve because we believe in protecting the freedoms that allow you to get an education and pursue your dreams. Don't ever let anyone tell you that courage and honor belong to only one type of person." With that, she walked away, her confident stride and military bearing leaving no doubt in anyone's mind about who she was and what she had accomplished. The students slowly began to disperse, but the atmosphere in the school had fundamentally changed. Word spread quickly through the classrooms about what had happened in the hallway, and by lunchtime, Sarah found herself in an entirely different position than she had been the day before. Instead of eating alone, she was approached by several students who wanted to apologize for their behavior and ask questions about her mother's service. The questions were respectful now, born of genuine curiosity rather than cruel mockery. "Is it true that she really went through the same training as the male SEALs?" asked Tom Chen, a student from Sarah's history class. "Yes, Sarah," replied, feeling comfortable talking about her mother's accomplishments for the first time in years. She had to meet exactly the same standards as everyone else. Actually, she had to work even harder because she was one of the first women to attempt the program. "That's incredible," said Maria Rodriguez, another classmate. "I can't even imagine how tough that must have been." For the first time since starting high school, Sarah felt like she belonged. She no longer had to hide who her mother was or make up stories about her family. The truth, as difficult as it had been to get people to accept, had finally set her free. But the day wasn't over yet. During her last period English class, Mrs. Patterson made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Class, we have a special treat today. I've just learned that we have a real American hero in our school community, and I've arranged for a special presentation tomorrow during our assembly period." Sarah's stomach dropped. She had a feeling she knew where this was going. "Commander Lisa Martinez, the mother of one of our own students, has graciously agreed to speak to our school about her experiences as one of the first female Navy SEALs. This is an incredible opportunity to learn from someone who has served our country with distinction." The class erupted in excited chatter, and Sarah could feel all eyes turning toward her. But this time, instead of mockery or disbelief, she saw excitement and admiration in her classmates' faces. After class, Mrs. Patterson approached Sarah's desk. "I hope you don't mind that I arranged this without asking you first. After hearing about what happened this week, I thought it would be good for the whole school to hear your mother's story." Sarah nodded, though she felt a mix of nervousness and pride about the idea of her mother speaking to the entire school. It would certainly be different from hiding in the shadows and keeping her family's story secret. When Sarah got home that afternoon, she found her mother in the kitchen again, but this time she was out of uniform, wearing casual clothes and looking more relaxed. "So," Commander Martinez said with a smile, "I hear I'm giving a speech tomorrow." "You don't have to if you don't want to," Sarah said quickly. "I know you're busy with your real job." "Sweetheart," her mother said, pulling her into another hug, "there's nothing more important to me than you and your well-being. If speaking to your school helps other students understand the value of military service and the importance of respecting one another, then it's time well spent." That evening, as Sarah did her homework, she could hear her mother in the next room preparing her presentation. For the first time in her life, Sarah was genuinely excited about going to school the next day. She no longer had to be ashamed of who her family was or worry about other people's disbelief. The truth was out, and it felt incredible. The next morning, Lincoln High School buzzed with an energy Sarah had never experienced before. Students were actually excited about the mandatory assembly, which was unusual since most school gatherings were met with groans and complaints. But today was different. Word had spread not just about Commander Martinez's upcoming presentation, but also about the dramatic confrontation in the hallway the day before. Sarah walked through the school entrance and was surprised to find that other students were greeting her warmly. Some even approached her with questions about what it was like growing up as the daughter of a Navy SEAL. For someone who had spent years trying to blend into the background, the attention felt both overwhelming and wonderful. Sarah called Jessica, the girl who had apologized the day before. "I've been reading about female Navy SEALs online all night. Your mom is like famous. There are articles about her and everything." Sarah smiled, still getting used to the idea that her classmates now saw her mother as a hero rather than a fantasy. She doesn't like to talk about the attention much. She says she was just doing her job. Just doing her job? Tom Chen joined the conversation, his eyes wide with amazement. "Dude, your mom has been in firefights with terrorists. That's not exactly a normal job." As the first bell rang, Sarah made her way to her homeroom class, where even her teacher, Rodriguez, seemed excited about the day's events. "Miss Martinez," he said as she took her seat, "I have to admit, when I first heard about your mother's profession, I was skeptical. I've since done some research and I owe you an apology. Your mother's service record is truly remarkable." The morning classes seemed to fly by, and before Sarah knew it, it was time for the assembly. She had been excused from her fourth period class early so she could meet her mother before the presentation began. When Sarah arrived at the school's main office, she found her mother waiting in the conference room, reviewing her notes one final time. Commander Martinez was wearing her dress blue uniform, complete with all her ribbons and medals, and she looked every inch the decorated military officer she was. "Nervous?" Sarah asked, though her mother seemed completely composed. "A little," Commander Martinez admitted. "I've briefed admirals and generals, but talking to teenagers is a different kind of challenge." Principal Johnson entered the room, looking slightly starstruck despite his professional demeanor. "Commander Martinez, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I have to tell you, in 25 years of education, I've never seen students this excited about a school assembly. I'm honored to be here," Commander Martinez replied. "I hope I can give these young people something valuable to think about." As they walked toward the auditorium, Sarah could hear the excited chatter of hundreds of students filling the large space. When they reached the side entrance, Principal Johnson peeked through the door and whistled softly. "Commander, I think you should know that word has spread beyond our school. We've got some unexpected visitors today." Sarah looked confused, but her mother just nodded calmly. "Local media?" "Local media. Some military personnel from the nearby base, and several parents who heard about today's presentation and wanted to attend. I hope you don't mind the larger audience." Commander Martinez straightened her uniform and smiled. The more people who hear about the importance of military service and respecting one another, the better. When they entered the auditorium, Sarah was amazed by what she saw. The student section was completely full, with every seat taken and students sitting in the aisles. But beyond the student area, the adult section was also packed with people in military uniforms, parents, teachers, and even some individuals with cameras and notebooks who were clearly journalists. As Principal Johnson walked to the podium to introduce the speaker, the auditorium gradually fell silent. Sarah took a seat in the front row, her heart pounding with pride and nervousness. "Students, faculty, and honored guests," Principal Johnson began. "Today we have the privilege of hearing from a true American hero. Commander Lisa Martinez is not only one of the first women to successfully complete Navy SEAL training, but she has also served our country with distinction in some of the most dangerous places on Earth." He gestured toward Commander Martinez, who stood and walked confidently to the podium. The applause was thunderous, and Sarah noticed that several of the military personnel in the audience had stood up in a show of respect. When the applause died down, Commander Martinez looked out over the sea of faces and began to speak. Thank you for that warm welcome. Before I begin, I want to address something that happened in this school this week. My daughter Sarah was ridiculed and called a liar for telling the truth about my military service. She was told that women couldn't be Navy SEALs, that she was making up stories, and that her family wasn't worthy of respect. The auditorium was completely silent now. Sarah could see Brad Thompson sitting several rows back, slumped low in his seat with his face red with embarrassment. I'm not here to shame anyone or make anyone feel bad about their initial reaction, Commander Martinez continued. The truth is, until recently, there were no female Navy SEALs, so skepticism was understandable. But I am here to talk about why that changed and what it means for all of you. She clicked a remote, and a large screen behind her displayed a photo of a group of Navy SEALs in full combat gear, standing in front of a military helicopter. In the center of the group was a figure that was clearly female, though fully equipped and ready for battle. This photo was taken in Afghanistan 3 years ago, just before a mission to rescue hostages from a terrorist compound. That's me in the center, and those are my teammates. For 6 hours, we operated behind enemy lines, and when it was over, we had successfully rescued 12 civilians without losing a single American life. The auditorium was so quiet that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. She had known her mother was brave, but hearing the details of her actual missions was both thrilling and terrifying. The point isn't that I'm special or different from other SEALs, Commander Martinez went on. The point is that courage, honor, and dedication to service don't depend on whether you're male or female. They depend on what's in your heart and how hard you're willing to work to achieve your goals. She clicked the remote again, and the screen showed a photo of her during SEAL training, covered in mud and looking exhausted but determined. SEAL training is designed to break you. The instructors push you beyond what you think is possible, physically and mentally. Many people, both men and women, don't make it through. I almost quit myself several times. But every time I wanted to give up, I thought about the example I wanted to set for my daughter and for other young women who might one day want to serve their country in the same way. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she listened to her mother share stories she had never heard before. She had always known her mom was strong, but she was only now beginning to understand the depth of that strength. Commander Martinez spent the next 30 minutes sharing stories from her training and her deployments, always emphasizing the teamwork, dedication, and sacrifice required to serve at the highest levels of the military. She spoke about the importance of physical fitness, mental toughness, and never giving up on your goals, no matter how impossible they might seem. But then she shifted her focus to something even more important. All of these military stories are impressive, but they're not the most important thing I want to talk to you about today. The most important thing I want to discuss is how we treat each other, especially when someone is different from us or claims to be something we don't expect. She looked directly at the student section, her eyes serious but kind. This week, my daughter was bullied because students here couldn't believe that a woman could be a Navy SEAL. They assumed she was lying because her truth didn't match their expectations. But here's what I want you to understand. Every person you meet has a story you don't know. Every family has achievements, struggles, and experiences that might surprise you. She paused, letting her words sink in. The young man sitting next to you might have a parent who works as a janitor, but that parent might also be a volunteer firefighter who has saved lives. The quiet girl in your math class might seem ordinary, but she might go home every day to help take care of a disabled sibling. The student who always looks tired might work a job after school to help support their family. Sarah could see students throughout the auditorium nodding thoughtfully, many of them looking at their classmates with new eyes. My point is this, Commander Martinez continued. Before you judge someone or call them a liar, take a moment to consider that their truth might be bigger and more complex than you expect. And if someone shares something about their family that seems impossible, maybe ask questions with curiosity rather than responding with mockery. She clicked the remote one more time, and the screen showed a photo of Sarah as a little girl, wearing a miniature Navy uniform and saluting the camera. This is my daughter when she was 7 years old. Even then, she was proud of my service. And I was proud of the strong, honest young woman she was becoming. She has never lied about who I am or what I do, because I raised her to value truth and integrity above everything else. Sarah felt her cheeks flush as the entire auditorium looked at the photo, but this time the attention felt good rather than embarrassing. Sarah had to spend years keeping quiet about my job because she learned that people wouldn't believe her. She watched her classmates talk about their parents' careers while staying silent about her own family's story. That's not fair to any child, and it's not the kind of community I want my daughter to grow up in. Commander Martinez stepped away from the podium and walked closer to the student section. I want all of you to make me a promise. Promise that you'll think twice before you dismiss someone's story as impossible. Promise that you'll stand up for students who are being bullied even if their situation seems unusual. And promise that you'll remember that the quiet kid in the corner might have the most interesting family story of all. The applause that followed was different from the polite clapping that had greeted her. This was heartfelt, enthusiastic, and it went on for several minutes. Sarah could see students wiping away tears, and even some of the adults in the audience seemed moved by her mother's words. When the applause finally died down, Principal Johnson returned to the podium to announce that Commander Martinez would take a few questions from the audience. Hands shot up throughout the auditorium, and for the next 20 minutes, students asked thoughtful questions about military service, training, and what it was like to be a woman in a male-dominated field. Commander Martinez answered each question with patience and honesty, clearly enjoying the opportunity to educate young people about military life. Finally, one student near the back raised his hand and asked the question that everyone had been thinking about. Commander Martinez, what would you say to students who bullied your daughter about your job? The auditorium fell silent again, and Sarah held her breath, wondering how her mother would respond. Commander Martinez was quiet for a moment, then smiled warmly. I would say that everyone makes mistakes, and everyone deserves a chance to learn from those mistakes. The students who questioned my daughter's story weren't necessarily bad people. They just didn't have all the information they needed to make a good decision. Now they do have that information, and I trust that they'll make better choices going forward. She looked directly at Brad Thompson, who was still trying to make himself invisible in his seat. I would also say that it takes courage to admit when you're wrong and to apologize when you've hurt someone. Some of the strongest people I know are those who can acknowledge their mistakes and work to do better. Brad slowly raised his hand, and Commander Martinez nodded at him. Commander Martinez, he said, his voice shaky but determined, I owe you and Sarah a huge apology. I was completely wrong about everything, and I'm sorry for the way I treated your daughter. She was telling the truth, and I should have listened instead of making fun of her. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. Apology accepted, Commander Martinez said graciously. And I hope this experience has taught all of us something valuable about the importance of treating each other with respect and kindness. As the assembly came to an end, students began filing out of the auditorium, but many of them stopped to speak with Sarah as they passed her seat. Some apologized for their past behavior, others complimented her on her mother's presentation, and several asked if they could sit with her at lunch. For the first time in her high school career, Sarah felt like she truly belonged at Lincoln High School. She no longer had to hide who she was or make up stories about her family. The truth was out, and it had set her free in ways she had never imagined possible. As she waited for the auditorium to clear so she could speak with her mother, Sarah reflected on everything that had happened over the past few days. She had learned that standing up for the truth wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. She had discovered that her classmates were capable of growth and change when given the right information and motivation. And most importantly, she had realized that she had inherited more from her mother than just her physical appearance. She had inherited her strength, her integrity, and her unwillingness to back down when facing adversity. Commander Martinez finished speaking with the last group of adults who had approached her after the presentation and walked over to where Sarah was waiting. How do you think that went? She asked with a smile. I think you changed some minds today, Sarah replied, hugging her mother tightly. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth in the first place, Commander Martinez said. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. You showed the same kind of courage this week that I try to show on my missions. As they walked out of the auditorium together, Sarah knew that her life at Lincoln High School would never be the same. But for the first time since starting high school, she was excited about that change rather than afraid of it. She had learned that the truth, no matter how difficult it might be for others to accept, was always worth defending. And she had discovered that sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, the whole world stands up with you.